Welcome to Know This Live. I'm Zinhle Essamuah. Joining me today is Representative Ayanna Pressley. The Congresswoman from Massachusetts has just kicked off her second term in Washington. When she was sworn in 2019, she became the first Black woman elected to Congress from Massachusetts. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Good to be with you, Zinhle.
Yeah, and I want to start just by asking how you are doing. I know that just 2 months ago, the Capitol insurrection happened, and I know a lot of individuals and lawmakers on the ground there have still been talking about the trauma that lingers from that event, particularly Black lawmakers. So, how have you been since that attack?
I so appreciate that question because I think often um, our humanity can get lost in all of this, and especially after 4 years of drinking from a fire hose of both hateful and hurtful rhetoric and policies and an emboldening of white supremacy. What I felt on that day was a familiar and like a deeply ancestral sort of way. And as committed as I am to doing everything and why I pushed for impeachment, expulsion, and investigation to ensure that there is accountability, it's not just about ensuring that there's never a breach like this again at the Capitol. This is about ensuring that as a Black woman in America, that I am safe. And, and all other Black Americans and other marginalized communities and every other American life. And that means we must root out the evil and the scourge that is white supremacy and actively dismantle systemic and structural racism for which white supremacy is its host.
Yeah, and you've talked a lot about race, and obviously our country has been in a racial reckoning, and there's a lot going on. There's also a pandemic. Before we turn to the pandemic and the relief package surrounding it, I'm mindful that many of the movements we've seen centered around George Floyd. And I know that the trial for former officer Derek Chauvin began this week. What are you expecting from that, especially given that we know that it's not common for officers involved in fatal shootings to be convicted? What are you expecting?
Well, maybe the more appropriate question is, what am I praying for, organizing for, legislating for? Justice. And there can be no justice, and in the truest sense, because if there were justice, George Floyd and all those other unarmed Black Americans that we've lost to police brutality would still be with us. But there must at least be accountability. And so my response to that legislatively is why I have reintroduced my bill to end qualified immunity. These doctrines, which have been codified in court case after court case, have allowed officers to function with callous disregard for Black and brown bodies, reckless impunity, um, surveillance, profiling, lynching, brutality, and murder without any consequences. And so that is my legislative response.
Yes, and I know that the House passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, and that too would ban chokeholds and reform qualified immunity. You mentioned what you've introduced. How does that differ from the Justice in Policing Act? Can you outline that for us?
Sure. Well, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, I think, makes some important, steps towards the broader and more transformative and systemic work that needs to be done, like banning no-knock warrants, which would have saved the life of Breonna Taylor, and ending chokeholds, which would have saved the life of George Floyd. I've introduced a bill to reintroduced a bill to abolish qualified immunity, again, which is specific to ensuring that we have that accountability. There is a recourse, and that does not exist here. So if you have that with lawyers, if you have that with doctors, with malpractice, or you have that with every single profession, except when it comes to law enforcement. And so that's why I reintroduced my bill to abolish and to end the practice of qualified immunity.
And how is support for that in the House?
I think it's growing. We certainly saw a greater attention and a commitment to lean in on that after George Floyd, but we're still, doing the work of building co-sponsors educating people on the issue. Look, at the end of the day, the reason why the Congressional Black Caucus, and I do want to, credit the CBC and our immediate past Congressional Black Caucus chair, Karen Bass, for the role that she played. The reason why the CBC was shovel ready with, dozens, if not hundreds of bills to address systemic and structural racism and police brutality is because we've been on the front line of these issues for a long time. And that's because we've been on the front line of the hurt for a long time. And so, the inequities and disparities and the racial injustices that have persisted for centuries are not naturally occurring. They were legislated. And so if we can legislate hurt and harm, then we can legislate equity, healing, and justice. And if we're going to keep throwing around words like a reckoning, then we need to meet that reckoning with bold, systemic, and transformative change. And that's also why I've reintroduced my People's Justice Guarantee.
Thank you for that. And I know that, of course, one of the biggest issues of the moment and of the year has been COVID-19. You voted in favor of the major legislation that passed this week, but you also said that the federal government, quote, failed to meet the scale and scope of the crisis. So to you, right, you've been talking about the needs for systemic change, both in terms of race, but now pivoting to COVID and health. What did this relief package miss?
Well, first, I just want to say that, I'm serving in the biggest congressional progressive caucus in the history of Congress. And because of our organizing and our mobilizing and our advocacy, we were able to secure some major progressive wins in partnership with our allies and advocates that will be deeply impactful, such as expanding eligibility for what is commonly referred to as stimulus checks. But at this point, I really consider them to be survival checks, but expanded eligibility to include mixed status families and adult dependents. As well as the child tax credit, which will cut childhood poverty in half, massive investments in housing, utility supports, and a massive infusion of resources to get us on pace to a safe reopening of schools, and also a massive federal investment in vaccine distribution with an eye on equity, which I continue to push for. So I'm encouraged by those victories and those wins that were secured. But I do think that, and I'm deeply disappointed that the $15 minimum wage was not included. We know how critical that is to address poverty and to increase the wages of some 32 million Americans. And so on that front, that's why we must abolish the filibuster. Not only for the last 4 years has the GOP-led Senate been an obstructionist to justice and to progress and to advancing a relief package that would meet the scale and scope of this crisis. But now we find that even having the Dems in that slim majority, that the filibuster continues to be a procedural obstruction to justice and progress and to allowing us to meet the needs of everyone who calls this country home. So it needs to be abolished. And we need to introduce and pass legislation to raise the federal minimum wage to $15.
And I want to spend some time on minimum wage, but before we do, you mentioned an interesting term. You said vaccine redlining. Are we seeing that? Where are we seeing that? Like, what needs to be done about that?
Yeah, of course we're seeing that. I mean, the pandemic has only laid bare the inequities and disparities and racial injustices that it's laid bare and exacerbated those. And those exist, again, because of comorbidities of structural racism, unequal access to healthcare. And that's why within weeks of the pandemic, myself and Senator Warren were calling for the collection of racial demographic data when it came to COVID infections, hospitalization, and death rates. We knew anecdotally how this would play out, as the adage goes, when white America gets a cold, Black folks get pneumonia. That is as metaphorical as it is literal. We had seen the Black community be disproportionately impacted by H1N1. So we knew anecdotally how it was going to play out, but we needed the data to directly inform the marshaling and dedication of resources. And our bill, the Equitable Data Collection Act, tenets of that were integrated into the relief bill previously. Prior to our legislation introduction, the CDC was only collecting age and gender, not race. And so now I continue to bang the drum in partnership with Senator Warren and Markey and others for the collection of anonymized racial demographic data when it comes to vaccine recipients. You cannot, the communities that have been the hardest hit must be prioritized. And we have not seen that play out. The efforts that have been the most successful are those that are led by and driven by communities. I've said so often the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power driving and informing the policymaking.
And of course, you're also a vocal advocate of raising the minimum wage. You've spoken about that a bit. If Democrats weren't able to get it raised to $15 in this effort, what makes you think it will be able to be passed down the line, if at all?
I don't allow myself to. You have to be an eternal optimist to do this work, and I don't just hope for change. I work and I mobilize and I legislate for it, and so I'm going to continue to center the needs of everyone who calls this country home and do everything I can to mitigate their hurt. So that's all we can do is just keep organizing.
Yeah, especially I think it's interesting given the amount of challenges that are being faced. It seems that you're clinging to a lot of hope. And I want to bring up something you posted on Instagram. You shared an image of your new congressional ID after you lost your hair to an autoimmune disease. And you wrote, quote, "I lost my hair but gained something else. Who says you need hair to rock a crown?" I know hair is a particularly intimate thing for women, especially Black women. I cut my hair this year. Knowing all that, what have you gained from this experience, both with your hair, but also looking back on the last year that we've had collectively as a country?
Well, first of all, your hair looks great. And I definitely want to get to that question, but I do think it's important that I say this when it comes to fighting, because certainly I feel more emboldened every day to do that. And that's some of what I gained when I lost my hair, I think. But in addition to fighting for a $15 minimum wage, I'm going to continue to fight for paid leave that was also left out of this package and is critical for reoccurring survival checks of $2,000 for the duration of this crisis, and of course the canceling of student debt, which is a economic justice issue, a racial justice issue, and I think essential to a just and equitable economic recovery from this pandemic. And President Biden does have the authority, with the stroke of a pen, by executive action, to cancel $50,000 worth of student debt. Congress gave him that authority through the Higher Education Act. As for my ID and why I posted that and the words that I offered there, that's what my husband said to me when I was in the early days of the traumatic hair loss I experienced from alopecia totalis. And so, what have I gained? I've gained a community. There are nearly 7 million Americans living with alopecia. There are various forms of it. It disproportionately impacts Black and brown women, Black women in particular. And so I've gained an incredible alopecia strong warrior community, new perspective, and again, the appreciation for the fact that I don't need hair to rock a crown. It's still there.
Absolutely. Well, Representative Ayanna Pressley, thank you for sharing your time, your insights, your crown with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for watching. This has been Know This Live. I'm Zinhle Essamuah.